How you doing? I'm David Delgado.
And I'm Dan Goods, and we want to share with you a little journey that we've been on. It's about a project that we don't quite have figured out at this moment. We don't exactly know where it's going to end, but we're really excited about it, and whenever we tell people about it, it seems like it hits some resonant chord with them. And it sort of started back when we were in school. We both went to art school, and I was in graphic design. And I remember putting up our work up on the wall, and we'd critique it. And most of the time, the critiques were all about like typefaces or colors or style, and it didn't always talk about the idea. And then there were other students who were ad students, and they couldn't design at all. But they had these crazy big ideas that were just fabulous, and I loved the big ideas. And then there were other students that were called environmental design students. They weren't architects and they weren't interior designers, but they could use lighting and materials and create very fascinating spaces. And I love that idea of when you walk into a space that you felt something. And so I wanted to take that aspect of environmental design, the big ideas of advertising, and sort of combine it with the beauty and the sophistication of graphic design.
Well, as Dan mentioned, I wasn't a graphic design student. So graciously mentioned that that wasn't my skill set necessarily, but I loved ideas. And mostly I love to see people who took ideas and communicated them in just crazy, interesting, experimental ways. And there was something that really had an effect on me back in the time. It was this experience that these people made, and they had to solve this little solution, solve this little problem. And it was trying to get people to exercise more, right? And what they did is approach it in simple way. They looked at how people were going into the subway, a really busy city, right? And everybody was taking the escalator down the stairs, and almost nobody was taking the stairs themselves. And so they said, well, do you think we can get people to use the stairs? And they said, well, let's try it. So they came up with a solution that I love. And they turned the stairs into this giant piano. And it was so cool. And so they took each staircase, right, each step, and put a little sensor pad. And they even made it look like a piano, right? So you had white steps and black steps and white steps and black steps. And they put one a little farther out, like closer to the top for people who were just walking by. And then you would see people walking by, and they were going to the escalator, and they'd step on one of the first keys, and it'd make a sound, boom. And they'd say, wait a minute, what's that? And then they'd take another step, boom, boom, boom. And it was really interesting. And so they outfitted the whole space with all of these cameras so you could see the behavior of what people were doing. And it was interesting. So people would do that, and then soon you would see people walking slowly down the steps, boom, 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 boom. Then you would see people working together to make a little bit of music. And then by the end of the day, you would see kids running up and down the stairs trying to make as much noise as they possibly could, And you would see, people working together to make little songs. And people literally started using the steps more than they started using the escalator. And I love that, because you know that every single person who was involved in that day went home and they told that story to somebody else, because it was an experience that they loved, And it was that time that I said, that's what I want to do. I want to do this kind of thing, And I found out that there's a whole bunch of different ways to do it. Sometimes it starts out just from the aspect of an experimentation alone. And it's kind of funny because Dan and I have lunch all the time. We work together. And I'll be telling him some story and talking on. And, I'll be looking at him, and he'll be looking at his glass and looking at the sunshine shine through his glass, and it's going on the table, and he's studying the light patterns. And I say, come on, Dan, are you even listening to me at all? And he would look up, and he'd say, just say, this is so interesting. Look at this. Isn't that interesting? Not talking about what I'm saying, right? And you know what? He's right, because I would find the same thing interesting too. The way that light interacts with water. And so we decided, well, maybe if we did this, if we could take it, just that idea, that phenomenon, and elevate it, try to magnify that experience so that people can interact with it, but in a way that they'd never seen it before. And the challenge that we had was well, first of all, how do you control that? How do you take that water and choreograph the movement itself, right? And we didn't know what we were doing. We had no clue, you know? So we had to make inventions. We had to tear apart devices and hack things together, but we kind of started to figure it out. And it was really interesting because we were just learning as we went, right? And what we found out is that this experience started to affect people in ways that we didn't necessarily plan for, we didn't imagine. What it did is it attracted people in. People wanted to be in the light. It was really a funny thing. And we said, oh, isn't that interesting? And then people would sit quietly in front of it and just watch. And we said, oh, isn't that interesting? Wow. And then also it just felt really good to be inside the light, you know, in itself. And it was that learning process that got us going, and we said, oh, I think we should do more of this.
So we both work at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, but that project was something that we actually did at night and on the weekends. But when I first got to JPL, they started to tell me about finding planets around other stars. And that's really mind-blowing because you can see it on Star Trek, but in real life we are finding thousands of planets that are around other stars. And so they would tell me about all these technologies and these big numbers, and I didn't understand because I'm not very good at math and other types of things. But anyways, I decided that I needed to create an experience for me to actually understand what they were talking about. So I found a little grain of sand. It's not exactly too hard to find in California. Well, I found a grain of sand, and I said, let's imagine that this is the Milky Way galaxy. There are billions of stars within the Milky Way galaxy, and that's where we live. So I took this little grain of sand, and I went to a guy, and I said, can you drill a hole into this little grain of sand? And he said, yes. So I don't know if you can see it there. There's a little hole in that grain of sand. They actually used a carbide drill bit. That little hole represents where we live, but it's also the space in which we have looked and found these thousands of planets that are within our galaxy. And we don't have very good technology, so there are actually tens of thousands of planets within that little teeny tiny area, let alone the rest of the galaxy, let alone the 6 roomfuls of sand that you would need to represent all the other galaxies that we know about. And so I would have this giant room full of sand, and you'd walk through it, and you'd look under this little tiny magnifying glass, and you'd see the hole drilled into the grain of sand, and you'd either feel really, really insignificant. I hope you actually look at it and see that you are significant.
NASA has been researching the Earth, and they're looking at the land and the sky and the sea, and they're trying to figure out what is going on with the Earth. So, I mean, you would think we know all about it, right? We've lived on the Earth for a long time, but we don't. And we're here, and the Earth is changing. So we're trying to figure it out. But the problem we were given is that you ask people what NASA does, and most people say, oh, yeah, the space station and landing on Mars, and maybe that's it, you know? So we had to figure out a way to allow people to know that NASA was studying the Earth. So we came up with this idea. What if you could take a big dome, a big giant dome, right, 30 feet in diameter, and you just cover it with speakers, right? So you have speakers all over the inside of the dome. And you can take sound then when you have that dome with speakers and wrap the sound around, right? So you can start over here and wrap it over here. You can start back here and wrap it over this way. It's sort of like a giant speaker system on steroids. It's like, you know, you can do anything with it. And so, of course, we wanted to build it. And what we did is we wanted an object of wonder to surround this thing so that people could look at it and just be invited in. It's almost so you don't even need to know what's going on inside. You just want to come in. And this is a shell. So imagine picking up a seashell on the beach, right? And you can hear the ocean. It's one of those things. Well, this is a magic shell that allows you to hear something different. It allows you to hear the satellites that are traveling above your head at that time. But we've given them special sounds. So some of them sound like the ocean, some of them sound like the atmosphere, and some of them sound like earthy sounds like the land. And when you hear them all, it sounds like an ecosystem, like Earth. And so this is a little bit of a preview of what we're doing, because next week we're actually going to build it. And so this hasn't been done yet, and we're really, really excited. We've been working on it And hopefully next time I'll be able to show you some real photos because we're going to be there, and this is the animation, and hopefully we can even bring it back here to show you guys in person.
A little nerve-wracking. It's nerve-wracking to be in a different country when you're supposed to be setting up something else that's supposed to open next week. But here we are, we thought this was worth it. So anyways, yeah, thank you.
We'll be leaving immediately after
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
So some of you guys may have seen this in the back of the room, but I love this idea of seeing the unseen. And in the back of the room is this special little box. And I don't know if you've seen it yet, but it has this fog in it. And this fog is just exactly the right size. You'll see little, I don't know if you can see it there, but you'll see little streaks coming through. Some of them are straight streaks, and some of them kind of wiggle. They kind of look like little hairs flying through. But those streaks are actually particles that have come from outer space. So stars explode, and they send particles all over the place, and some of them make it all the way to Earth, and then some of them make it all the way to Denmark, and some of them go through the walls of this building and then slam into that little box. And for a fraction of a second, it proves to us that there is an invisible world that is all around us. And it's not only around us, but it's through us, because millions of these things are flying through you and flying through me at this very second. And I love to look inside of there, and other people, they just can spend all day long looking inside and kind of thinking about what is out there and what was inside. And it's just sort of this beautiful, mysterious thing that is right in front of us, but we don't have the eyes to see it. Well, every once in a while, David and I get strange emails. And I got a strange email from our friend Ivan Amato. And Ivan wrote me up and he said, "Dan, there needs to be a museum of awe, and you need to run it." I was like, "Yeah, thanks, man. That was funny. That's cool. And then he called me up and he said, "No, damn, there needs to be a museum of awe, and you need to run it." And I was like, "I would love to run the Museum of Awe. That sounds so cool." Well, I would, I called David up and I said, "Let's talk about this thing." And we thought, well, maybe the Museum of Awe is like an art museum, but it's not pretentious. And maybe it's like a science museum, but instead of facts and figures, it's all about curiosity. And maybe it's like a theater, but instead of sitting out in the seats, you're actually on the stage, and the musicians and the actors interact with you. So I thought, I'd throw it into a talk here, there, and see what would happen. And all of a sudden, I'd have all these people standing in line saying, "Dan, can I work at the Museum of Awe? Can I help you raise money? Can I give you the basement of our skyscrapers so that you can work there? Maybe I can bring 25 students from Denmark over and help you come up with ideas."
Yay!
So we kind of looked at each other and said, maybe there's something here.
Yeah, so clearly it resonated with people in a pretty deep way. And the same thing happened to us. I mean, when Dan first got that email, he was, of course, kind of shocked. When I heard that name, I was like, I'm kind of shocked. What is this thing, right? What is it? And we were asking ourselves that question. And we went through this whole thought process of trying to think about it from the perspective of actually building a museum, right? But it didn't really quite feel right. It was just sort of off a little bit. It was sort of hard to approach it that way. And so one night, Dan and I sat down for dinner, and we were just bouncing ideas back and forth with basically that question, right? What is this thing? How do we do this thing? And a new line of thought began to develop. We thought, well, maybe the Museum of Awe is the oldest museum in existence. It doesn't have any walls. It doesn't have an address, because we're in it. This is the Museum of Awe. We're inside the Museum of Awe right now. It is Earth. It is the universe. It is all around us. But we've all become a little blind, right? We're blind because we're too busy. We have too many responsibilities. We're going from here to there. We're too jaded by all the negative things that surround us. And that sort of creates blinders in front of us. And so then it dawned on us, and we said, you know what? We're not building a museum. What we're doing is we want to create experiences that allow people to connect with the museum. We want to create experiences that allow people to understand that they're actually inside the museum. And all you need to do is find the door.
Well, that line of thinking opened up a whole lot of options for us, because no longer do we actually need, it costs a lot of money for a building, right? And maybe we don't need a giant building like all the other museums do. Maybe we just create pop-up experiences around the world, and maybe it'll stay someplace for a year, maybe someplace for a couple days, and then it just vanishes, it's gone. And the idea is that each one of these pop-ups would be sort of guided by a single theme, just a word or a phrase, but we look at it from lots of different viewpoints so that you really get a rich understanding of that one theme. And so we've challenged ourselves is like, how can we be able to give people a sense of the world with the eyes of a 3-year-old? Because to a 3-year-old, everything is the Museum of Awe, right? So our subjects are going to range from everything from the beauty of the natural world to the awe and wonder of the mundane objects that happen to be in your kitchen or in your laundry or your room, all the way to the sort of the beauty and the mystery of those people that will sacrifice themselves for others. Because there is awe and beauty within the human spirit, despite what the news has to say. So our passion is to create these experiences so that when you leave, you are reminded of the gift and the privilege that it is to be alive. So we're just starting this journey. We're not really sure where it's going to go. We hope to be able to bring you these experiences at some point in the future. But perhaps in the meantime, you guys can go and find your own door and enter the Museum of Awe. Thank you.
Thank you.